Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live in the studio with me today, I have August LeVangie. August is an account executive at Memphis Reprographics in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Reprographics provides integrated solutions for design documents. Prior to Memphis Reprographics, August worked in both marketing and recruiting. August, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm really excited to talk with you. I mentioned before we got started that some of the different parts of your career that I want to be able to touch on. You know, you're currently in sales, but you've worked in recruiting. You've worked in a number of different areas. I think that will be very relevant and useful to our listeners. And so I'm really excited. The first thing I think I want to jump into is a little bit about your career history, because you have worked in a lot of different fields. And I'd like to just kind of share with our listeners kind of what your background is.
Okay, yeah, I've had a pretty diverse career, and it's just because I like to, I'm just interested in a lot of different areas. So I got my degree in communications, and so that opened a lot of doors for me. And right off the bat, I started working for an international logistics firm, and then that led to working for FedEx, and then recruiting for FedEx, and then I worked freelance for a couple different places, just here and there, and now I am with Memphis Reprographics. That kind of sums it up.
No, that's great. That's great. And I think as we get into the questions, you're going to have a lot to share, especially, you know, on the recruiting side and sort of selling yourself. So that's great. First, I'd like to start, though, on the sales side, because I do get a lot of clients who come in and they say, you know, I'm considering working in sales. I've never done it before. And they have concerns, they have worries, they don't know if it's right for them. What would you say to someone if they came to you and they said, I'm considering sales?
Well, I think sales is so broad, and there's a lot of different areas, and so people can fit into probably a couple different sales categories. But the thing about sales is usually, depending on it, where you are in your career, sometimes it's hard to start later on, I guess. And it's something that a lot of people are looking for someone with experience. And it's just something to consider when you're going up against other people that might have been in the industry or had more sales experience. That is going to be kind of negative, I guess, in your side of things. And I don't know. It's you got to make sure that you're the type of person. Usually, if it's a sales position, they're looking for somebody that's really outgoing and that is a self-starter, somebody that doesn't need to be micromanaged and that can kind of come up with their own game plan. And really, for sales interviews and sales jobs, usually you go into them and they're going to ask you questions like, you know, how would you approach this territory and that sort of thing. And I mean, really looking for you to come up with a solution. And so if you're the type of person that likes to do that, then that would be great. But if you're more, you know, some people need to be given kind of a roadmap, and sometimes that's not the sales, I guess, cookie cutter kind of person that they're looking for, probably.
Absolutely. And, you know, you mentioned interviews, and it makes me think back to years ago, trying to think of when it was, coming out of college. I interviewed to do sales for a large company, and in the interview, it was very different than any interview I've ever had. They actually gave me a whiteboard and a marker, and they said, we'll be back in 5 minutes. You're going to pitch us on you. And it was great. I really enjoyed it, but it was really an unusual interview where they kind of caught you off guard just to see how you would react.
For sure, yeah. And within FedEx, to kind of promote, and when I was trying to get, you know, up the corporate ladder, they did similar interviews like that. And I mean, that's the thing about sales, is that it's so broad and they can throw anything at you. Mm-hmm. And so you really have to be on your toes and ready for that. And I mean, if you're that type of person, I think that, you know, that excites me. I think that that's fun, and that's why I love it, just because it's always so different and you don't know what to expect, and you have to be very quick and I don't know, it's a fun challenge and never boring, so.
So one of the big concerns that clients have who are interested in sales in particular has to do with compensation. They're really worried, like maybe they have children, and they're really worried that they would get into a position that was 100% based on commission. Is that the case, or do some have bases, or does it vary?
Yeah, it totally varies. So there's usually, I would say, like maybe 3 basic sales compensation offers. Sometimes, very rarely, it's just a straight salary. But some places are 100% commission. I know a lot of like financial firms and stuff start out like that. But there's a lot of firms. I mean, if they're in that situation where they need guaranteed, I know that for the most part, from what I've heard and my history, they'll give you like a ramp up period, which is usually like 3 months or maybe a quarter or something, to build your business or get acclimated to, the new industry or, just their company. And then you'll go on commission, or it'll be a mixture where it's, a base salary always guaranteed and then a commission on top of that. And so there's all these different structures, and sometimes they can be very overwhelming and confusing. And there's jobs in the past where I haven't even understood the commission, and I just got a check and I was like, well, I guess that's good.
Yeah, so it sounds like it can be complicated.
Oh yeah, for sure. So many different ways to be compensated and have that.
That's good. So, I mean, it sounds like sales is not for everyone, but there are certain, types of people that it could be perfect for. And, if you do need guaranteed income, it sounds like there are options available at some companies.
Yeah. And I think that everybody, if you think about it too, if it's somebody that's interested and has never done sales before, a lot of people I know, just being around, like, they'll be like, oh, you'd be great in sales. So if you've heard that a lot, you probably would be good. Or you might have actually done sales and not even realized it. I mean, you're selling yourself when you're interviewing for any job pretty much. And, if you think back to a lot of people in college or, maybe even high school had jobs, in the retail or working as a waiter or something like that. I mean, you're in sales, even though it doesn't seem like a grown-up sales job, but definitely still is.
No, that's a great point. I do think, you've even mentioned that to me before about my business, is that I'm in sales in a certain way. And I think oftentimes we don't think about the fact that we are putting ourselves out there every day in a role that could be related to sales.
Sure.
So that's good advice. So speaking of sales in your current role, one thing that I have been really impressed with is how you use LinkedIn. I think it's actually quite different than how other people use it. I'm curious, how much time every day or how much energy do you devote to LinkedIn?
Well, I think I really started using LinkedIn and getting familiar with it a couple years back when I worked as a recruiter. And then it's just kind of carried into my new job with Memphis Reprographics. And I mean, pretty much it's up. I have a page always on the background of my computer. And so if I come across a new company, I'll search them, I'll Google them, I'll look on LinkedIn. If there's someone who's contacted me, I get an email from someone that I'm not familiar with, or, I see a name that I can't remember the face, or, something like that. I mean, it's a great resource. I use it probably more than anything else, just because if the person's profile has enough information, then it's very beneficial.
No, that's great. So do you mainly use it for like contacting people or emailing them, doing research? Like, is it a combination of things?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, everything. Usually to contact them, I'll use email. I don't usually use the message portion of the LinkedIn, but it's mostly research, to find someone's background, especially if I want to try to build rapport with them. It's a good way to find if there's any connections or if we have anything in common, especially before an event, like a marketing event or some kind of industry luncheon or something like that. If there's certain people that I know I want to meet, it's just like a good way to have some talking points in case I need them, or if I end up at a table sitting next to them. It sounds kind of funny because it's almost like stalking them, but not really. But, just
Right.
just a good, sometimes it's hard to remember people's names and things like that, and so it helps with that as well, because you see their picture right there by their name, what company they're with, and then kind of a history. Usually people have like what schools they went to, hobbies. I mean, there's all sorts of things.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you mentioned the picture, which I was just about to ask you. I get a lot of clients who would prefer to not put a picture. And they ask me, Angela, do I really need to put a picture on my LinkedIn? And you just mentioned that you use that picture to like find them at events or to connect who they are. So I would assume you may think.
Yes, that's very important. And I think as far as the picture goes, though, I've seen some pretty random pictures that aren't necessarily helpful. So if it's like really blurry or there's like 6 people in it or, something like that, it is very easy to get, a professional photograph and use that. And so I would definitely suggest it to anybody, especially if you're looking for a job and you want to be taken seriously. It just looks so much more professional and it's a lot more helpful. I don't know how LinkedIn works necessarily, like on the back end, but it seems like either people are getting better at posting pictures, but there's not very many profiles that are suggested or that I guess they promote somehow. I don't know how they determine that without pictures. So I think that, of course they know if you have a picture or not with your profile. And so it's something to consider that way too.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So when you're doing research, do you sometimes look for sort of cold contacts, people who you've never met before? Or when you're looking through LinkedIn, is it always people you have an idea of who they are already?
No, there's some times where if it's a big company and I'm trying to learn or meet other people within the company, maybe say in a different area or something like that, then for sure. But it just kind of depends. It's so diverse. It's really a great resource because you can use it in so many different ways.
So if you found someone that was a contact that you didn't know already, do you ever connect to them, or how do you get in touch with them that first time?
I think for the most part, the way LinkedIn works too, like you can't really, unless you know like their email or it'll ask you like how you know them. And there are a few tricks, like if you really need to, let's say you want to link in with them or, connect and have them be one of your, connections or whatever. If you search their name, there becomes like a list of all the people with that name maybe, and then you have to, find that your city or whatever, and you can actually click on connect on that page without actually going to their profile, and it won't ask you for that information. And sometimes, but I think there's a limited number of times you can do that, so you have to be kind of particular. But for the most part, I'll wait until I meet somebody in person, or maybe like after a meeting or a luncheon or something like that, and then send them like an invitation, or vice versa. I'll get one from them.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, a lot of my clients they're worried, that they're going to reach out to someone who they've never met before and the person's going to be offended, or my suggestion is usually just to reach out anyway.
Yeah, it's so informal, and I think that like if you're just trying, because I can't tell you how many times people I've met will be like, oh yeah, I think I saw you on LinkedIn, and maybe not necessarily because we're friends or connected, but just because we have people in common. Your picture and your profile will pop up, and it'll do like the suggestions. But if you're interested in an industry or a particular company, or that you're trying to get in front of somebody to maybe interview with or whatever, I would definitely say, it's not gonna hurt you. I mean, unless your profile's, ridiculous. But I would say go ahead and definitely invite them to connect with you. And, it lets you send like, I think 60 characters or something like that, like a small message. And so and in some cases I have in the past will say, hey, I know so-and-so with your company, and I just wanted to, introduce myself, or something like that. You can write like a little message. Otherwise, I think the default is like, I'd like to link in with you. And then it'll be like August LeVangie or something. I don't know. But it has a default message. But if you go in there before you press like how you know them or whatever, you can change the message.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's really interesting because, I work with people across a lot of different industries, and I notice that folks who come from, say, sales are much more comfortable to reach out to someone that they don't know when they're asking for a new job, and oftentimes when we come from a different industry, it's just not something we've experienced. So we don't know how the other person will react. But I have found that when I reach out to people who I don't know, maybe at a company that I have no real contacts at, but I'm just really interested to know more about it, often they will connect with me. And
Yeah.
sometimes they will correspond with me. And, sometimes they'll even be willing to have a meeting with me, like a phone call, to talk more.
Yeah, if I can't find someone's email and that's the only way that, I can get in touch with them, I wouldn't hesitate to send them a message. And I think if you're in terms of trying to get a job, or if you're interested in a certain company that you don't even know if there's an opening, sometimes they'll post things internally. But if you, send a message and that shows a lot of initiative and, I guess guts, and a lot of times that's respected too. And it shows that you're really, serious about wanting to work for them or whatever you're trying to connect with that person or find out more information. And I think that would be impressive if I were on the other end, and somebody did that to me. So
Yeah, I totally agree. So when you don't know somebody's email address and you're searching for it, how do you find it?
Well, usually, Google is amazing, and there's all these different search engines now that you just type in the person's name. If you put it in quotations, they're only going to find, that person's exact name, and usually it pops up, or you'll get like a little piece of it. Like if you know what the beginning part is, you can kind of guess that the company email, if you go to their webpage, usually on the contact us, it'll say, so-and-so at info.com or whatever. So you'll know that the end at whatever.com, and then you can just kind of try to, guess like their first initial last name or just their first name. And depending, I think, on the size of the company and if it's, corporate or a mom and pop, usually there's a pattern, or you'll know that it's either going to be the first initial last name or the person's just first name.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So I recommend sometimes that people go to the press section of the company website.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you can find a press release, they often have a press contact, which is a totally different person, obviously, but it'll sometimes give you an example of how one email address is formed, and it can give you an idea of how the person you're reaching out to, how theirs is formed.
Yeah.
And it is interesting. I recently wanted to connect with the CEO of a really large, very well-known company here in the U.S. that I'm a huge fan of. And it took me 8 tries to figure out the email address, but I finally figured it out. And the CEO was so impressed at my persistence and that I was able to find his email that he actually wrote me back, which was really incredible. So, you may bug the person, but otherwise you're never going to connect with them anyway, so what difference does it make?
Right. Well, for sure. And the thing about that is I'm sure that you drafted each email individually to that address. And I know one of the companies I worked for, the CEO would change it pretty often, his email, just because people would figure it out, and he started doing it. And so that is impressive if you can go that extra mile and that you're going to show that work. And obviously it shows you're really trying to get in touch with them, and so you might get a response like you did.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really exciting when it happens. So as I mentioned at the beginning, your previous role, you've worked as a recruiter a couple of different times, and one of the questions I get often from clients is, are recruiters really using LinkedIn? Like, again, they say, do I really have to use LinkedIn? Do I really have to keep it up? Does anybody really look at it? From your experience as a recruiter.
Yeah, all the recruiters I worked with, and I'm sure the ones that I didn't, use LinkedIn and Facebook and MySpace. And we're going to Google that person's name that we're considering for a job, and all the research we can do, especially if it's kind of later on in the process and there's maybe like 3 people that we're trying to decide which ones to put in front of the customer. And, all that stuff's going to go into consideration. So a LinkedIn profile that is thoroughly filled out and has a lot of information, it's just going to look better, and I'm probably going to take them more seriously versus somebody that doesn't have a picture and it just says where they went to college.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you just touched on something else I think is really important. You said that in addition to LinkedIn, that you would do research on other social media sites like Facebook. So help me to understand, why would you do that kind of research, and how does it help you as a recruiter?
Well, as a recruiter, you're putting your reputation on the line because you're trying to place someone in a position at a company that they've hired you to go out and find the perfect match for whatever job they have opening for. And so, you're going to go try to above and beyond to make sure that you're not, having someone walk into the interview that's going to embarrass you, because it's pretty much going to reflect exactly like straight back on you, and it could cost you, future recruiting jobs and that sort of thing. So you just got to make sure that person isn't, going to do that. And you can find out a lot about a person on all the social media. I mean, even Instagram and even Pinterest. Everything.
Right. So it sounds like you would recommend that if you are looking for a job that you are cautious about what you're sharing.
Yeah. I think you should, no matter what, whether you're looking for a job or not, because, sometimes, actually I would say oftentimes, recruiters are not only looking at people that are actively, trying to find a job in that industry, but they're going to go out and contact people that match the description that they're looking for. Mm-hmm. And so maybe even if you're looking for a job, don't advertise, hey, I'm wanting a career in this, or I'm currently unemployed and I really want to, if you market yourself just as specifically as you can for the exact job you're looking for, in a way that it doesn't look like you're just sitting around twiddling your thumbs, but you're already in that industry, or you have had a history in that field, then it's going to be probably a lot more helpful.
Absolutely. When someone is seeking you out, when maybe you didn't even know a job existed, things are so much easier for you. Doors just open, as opposed to where you're being the one who's having to submit your resume online and not hearing back from anyone. Like it's such an easier process when you kind of created this online reputation for yourself.
Right. And I think recruiters, the last kind of resource that we would go to is, those monster.com or something like that to look at resumes. Really, I think most referrals and past, people that they've worked with, they've trusted, are going to be the first resource that they go to. And then if all else fails and you can't find the right fit, then, go look at just resume submissions and that sort of thing, and posting the job details online. And I don't know, it's so much, it gives you a lot more peace of mind, I guess, as a recruiter, to contact somebody that has been referred to you, or that you've worked with in the past, or that you've researched online, and you've found, rather than all these, it's sad to say, but there would be, 20 to 50 resume just submissions, and it's just like, okay, am I going to search through all of these? Or if the person I'm looking for has all of the requirements, they're going to pop out, and, all the other search and ways that I'm looking for people. And a lot of recruiters have a database already of anybody that anybody in the whole company, depending on the size of the recruiting firm, that they'll have notes that, you'll never know what it says about you, so you have to be kind of cautious whenever you talk to a recruiter with a company, and then it'll have the most, whatever resume you've given them last, so it might not be the most up to date, and usually it'll have a place where it'll have links to your Facebook and your LinkedIn and your Pinterest and your Instagram and your MySpace or whatever, like all that stuff.
Oh, that's interesting.
So yeah, it's a database that I guess every recruitment firm probably has their own, or they use different ones, but I know the one we had was very intuitive and had places for all that information, and even had notes on like previous employers where you could send kind of a questionnaire to somebody that you had put down as a reference, and it would be saved in there forever.
Wow, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Another thing that I recently learned, and this is going to be my last comment, I think, on the LinkedIn topic, but I recently interviewed a woman for one of my podcasts who specializes in LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And she mentioned that, how recruiters often pay sort of for an upgraded version of LinkedIn where they get sort of additional data and things. And she was mentioning to me that you can actually search on those endorsements that people give you. So when people are voting for like that you're the best at communications or sales or project management or whatever it is, I've had a lot of clients say to me, is that useful? Like, why does it matter that 50 people said I was good at this? But apparently, on the recruitment side anyway, you can search for people in Memphis, for example, who have the most votes for leadership or the most votes for project management, and that might be someone that as a recruiter you might reach out to. So again, I just think it speaks to the importance of using LinkedIn, keeping it up to date, and not kind of overlooking the importance of it.
For sure. And I mean, that's a direct reflection on the number of contacts you have, because of course, the more people that you're connected with on LinkedIn, the more opportunity for people to endorse you and say, oh yeah, that person's really good at this, or I worked with them in that area, and to kind of up that number. And then also, as far as the, there's where you can actually ask people that you've worked with in the past to write like a quick, I worked with so-and-so and they were so great and they helped me out in this way, little tidbits, and I guess it's kind of testimonials to yourself. And it'll go under the specific job that you've listed or whatever, and you can actually ask people in the, each field. And those definitely, I think, because they're short and sweet, and it's hard to get somebody to take time out of their day to do that for you. And so when they are there, I'm positive that a recruiter is going to read that. So
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really good point. So thinking back kind of on your life as a recruiter, what was one of the biggest mistakes that you saw that candidates made as you were working with a candidate?
I think it's really easy to get frustrated when you're looking for a job. And so I think candidates sometimes, you would get used to it as a recruiter, but you would get a lot of backlash or, the frustration taken out on you.
Oh, wow.
And so it's easy to see how someone would act under pressure, because usually a candidate would probably be under pressure to get a job.
Right.
And so I guess that's probably, the main thing.
So as a recruiter, you look at lots and lots of resumes, and I guess that you decide which candidate to put in front of the company. Is that true?
Yeah, normally, so the whole process, how it works, to kind of break it down as easy as I can, you've got ABC company, and they have a role that they're trying to fill for, this specific, let's say it's a sales job, and they want people, they'll have like must-haves, like the candidate has to have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they'll have would like to have, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then what the recruiter does is they're going to go and try to find a resume or a person that they have already worked with. Usually they start there first and see if there's anybody that meets all of them, all 10. And then if, they get a group of people, then they'll just go from there. But if not, then it's kind of like a trickle down, almost like a reverse pyramid, where you try to get, more specific and trying to find, I guess, candidates for that role until you have, usually it depends on the company, they'll let you submit like up to 5 people. You're like these,
5.
And usually you'll get their resume. So even if, let's say you didn't even get their resume, but you got a referral or you sell them because you did a LinkedIn, search or whatever, that you'll ask them, hey, I want to recommend you for this job. I know you're not looking for a job, but it looks like you'd be perfect for it. And, can I send your resume to this company? And the person will be like, yeah, sure. And you're like, okay, send me an updated resume. And then you submit them all, and the hiring manager will be like, okay, well, I want to interview these 3 people, or just this one, or these 2. And usually we would send a resume over and highlight or circle the stuff on the resume that meets the criteria that they had sent, that they were looking for. And depending on if it's a technical job, sometimes we would have like tests and that sort of thing to make sure that person was actually qualified and they weren't lying on their resume. And depending on the company, the size of it, sometimes they would have us do background checks or credit checks for, companies that were like, dealt with a lot of finances and that sort of thing. So, it can be a really long process or super short. So it just kind of depends.
So from the payment perspective, who pays the recruiter? Is it the job seeker or is it the company?
So there's a couple different ways. I guess it depends, again, on the job. So some jobs, a company might be using a recruitment firm because it's a job that they know that they only need somebody in there for like 8 months to do a specific role, like a project manager for one certain thing, or, maybe like somebody to build a internet site or something like that. And so they'll use a recruiter because the recruiter will actually hire that person.
Okay.
And the they'll pay them their paycheck and everything, and they're actually working for them. And they, when the job's over, if they can't put them directly into another position, then they'll have to pay them unemployment or, all the benefits and everything and the COBRA or whatever. And so that's what I guess makes it nice for larger companies to use a recruitment firm. Or there are, people that will call a recruiter and say, there's this job, it's a permanent job, and if you find somebody, then I'll give you a finder's fee is what they call it. And it's, a whatever monetary amount that they want. But if it's a recruiter job like the previous one I was talking about, usually it's an hourly, and they'll negotiate with the candidate or, the person that ultimately gets the job. And the way the recruiter gets paid is that they'll get a portion. So let's say that ABC company said, I'm looking for this person to fill all these, requirements for 8 months, and I'm willing to give them $30 an hour. Well, then the recruiter will go and try to find somebody that will take, like $20 an hour. And then that recruiter's going to make the 10 up and that sort of thing. And so that's kind of like the worst part that I didn't like about it. I wasn't really, because it's hard when you find somebody, might be the best candidate, but they're also going to want the most money, and you're, going to submit them because they're best for the company, and you have to be a very honest person, where you had people that also worked in some fields were like, well, this person could do the job and they would take, $15 less, and so I'll make more money. And so it's kind of scary in that part, and you just have to be really careful. And you have to know what you need to make, and you have to stick to your guns, and it might cost you the job, especially if you're working with a recruiter firm, but you just have to, kind of know that going in. And a lot of people didn't. And I think that that can hurt you, and
Yeah, definitely a lot
be
of
wary.
clients come in and they may say, gosh, I know I was the very best candidate for the job. I don't know why I didn't get it. And so often, just like this example, there are things that are outside your control that are not a reflection on whether or not you were the best candidate that may prevent you from getting a job sometimes.
Yeah, and not to be, I guess, derogatory towards recruiters, because a lot of times too with companies that don't use recruiters, the same thing could happen. They could probably find a rock star, person that would fit that role perfectly, and that person wants, way more money, and the company is only willing to give this salary or whatever. So it's not necessarily, it's just like if you use a broker for anything, they're going to take out their portion, but it could work the other way too. Even if you're representing yourself and you're not going through a recruiter, you could still, like you said, you never know what, if you felt like you were a perfect fit, why you didn't get the job or why you didn't get a call back and got second interview or whatever. It could be a number of things. So
Yeah, and so often
don't get discouraged.
Yeah, the company often feels uncomfortable to share
Or they might not
the
be able to.
details, right,
Yeah.
for some reason. And so, you're kind of left wondering, like, what happened? I was so excited. It seemed like it was going well. And maybe there was something that happened that, I've even had situations in my past experience where the hiring manager was promoted or left the company. And suddenly there was no longer sort of a champion for that particular spot.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, often the hiring stops or is put on hold for an extended period of time.
Or they reevaluate, like, do we really need this? And yeah.
Right. And the candidate may never hear back about it.
Right. And I think the same way that you should be proactive and, contact those people on LinkedIn and kind of stick your neck out there, I wouldn't hesitate. If you've interviewed for a job and you haven't heard back, or even if you got an email saying, we chose somebody else or we went a different route or whatever, to contact that person. Usually they'll give you their business card. And so even if it was with a recruiter or whatever, you can always, it's not going to hurt to send them an email or even pick up the phone and just say, hey, I just was looking for some feedback. Or, if you're really nice about it, they might tell you exactly why, you weren't chosen, or you can, find out what to do different on the next interview or something like that.
Right, absolutely. And that can
Feedback is
definitely
always,
help.
helpful.
Yeah. So before we got started, we were talking a little bit about the difference between recruiting and headhunting, kind of using those two terms a little bit differently. Can you help our listeners to kind of understand what you would perceive the difference to be between being a headhunter and being a recruiter?
So for me, and I don't know if it's right, but it just seems like in my experience, a headhunter I always thought of as an individual person kind of looking or maybe working for themselves, and usually it's in a specific industry where they just know a lot of contacts. And I feel like a headhunter usually is someone that's actually been in the industry for a really long time and maybe retired or made so many connections that they were like, I can maybe have a business on the side, or in addition to helping people with in other companies or an industry that you, I guess, are knowledgeable about to, suggest people. I feel like it's more of a referral, just like, hey, I heard so-and-so's hiring or something like that, where a recruiter is more, working for a company that's all they do, and it's in, all different kind of industries, and they might cover a lot of areas. And I feel like it's just, I don't know if it's my career or whatever, but it seems like recruiters are kind of a newer thing. Like, I'm sure it's been happening for a while, but it's gotten bigger as companies have grown, and it's easier for them to put that, use a resource outside of the company to do that job for them.
Right. And of course, we're talking about external recruiters versus an internal recruiter that maybe works inside of the company.
Yeah, and I think the company has to be pretty big to do that. But even FedEx, I know FedEx uses an external, and they actually work with a couple different recruiting firms. And so they'll compete against themselves and are competing against each other, trying to get their business for that particular job.
So speaking of that, I actually had a question come up yesterday from a client who brought in a job description, and it did not state who the company was. It was very vague. And they said to me, why would the company name be masked? And the only times I have really seen that have been when a recruiting firm is sometimes searching for someone. They will, it seems like, mask the company name, I don't know, maybe to protect themselves if they're competing against other businesses, or maybe they don't want you to go directly to the company because they want to get the referral. I don't know.
Yeah, for all those reasons, any of that, I think too, it's easy in Memphis just because there are a limited number of larger firms. If you know kind of the description, it's hard. I know when I was working as a recruiter to give a job description and it not be pretty blatantly clear without even stating the company who it was for.
Right.
But yeah, for all those reasons to, protect the company, because they don't want people to bombard. Another reason that a company would use a recruiter is so they don't get all those phone calls. They don't get tons of resumes and that sort of thing. And so the name would be left out for that reason, or because there's another recruiting firm that is also competing for, to fill that job. So it's a bunch of reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I have a number of clients that have mentioned, they've tried to work with recruiters in the past, and maybe it's been a struggle. Maybe the recruiter was available in the beginning and they kind of disappeared. Do you have any tips on the best ways to work with a recruiter to make it a positive experience? And how should you initially approach a recruiter? How do you start that kind of engagement?
I think for, I guess the main reason it's hard sometimes to work with a recruiter is because, in my experience again, they'll get a bunch of jobs that they have to fill. And so it's kind of a crazy day, and they have to fill, let's say, those 17 jobs before the day's done, or they'll stay there until 10 o'clock at night in the office trying to get it done. And so it's easy to let a lot of people go by the wayside if it's not, the urgent right then and there kind of thing. And it seemed the people that got really crazy and maybe probably, bit off more than they could chew, that they couldn't treat everybody with the kind of courtesy and respect that, they might want to, or that they deserve. And so they wouldn't get the, follow-up calls to say why they didn't get the job or whatever, or, they'll get a call saying, oh, I'm interested in you for this position, and then you never hear anything again, and it's frustrating because maybe they found somebody better or whatever, you don't know. And so I would suggest for kind of engaging a recruiter is if you find an email, or the recruiting firm usually has a website, and you could send a general email, and that might go to multiple recruiters within the company and attach your resume. And I wouldn't even say you're looking for a job. I would just be like, hey, I would like to be updated in your system. Here's my most current resume. And then what they're going to do is somebody's going to upload it, and the recruiting technology, you can put in keywords and it's going to do text recognition on resumes and pull those resumes. It's almost like a cloud kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but it'll give the recruiter, the top 10 resumes that have all those words the keywords that you've searched for in the database. And so I would say, always whenever you are doing a job search, to include a recruiter and go to all different firms, whatever.
So you can work with more than one recruiter at one time?
Well, they try not to. I mean, that's kind of frowned upon. But as far as being in the system, and that's the thing, is that you might belong, like somehow you can belong to a recruiter because that person has worked with you, and usually they'll look in the system, and if it says, August has talked to Angie 17 times in the past, couple months or whatever, then it's kind of like, oh, well, that's her girl. And then within the company, what they have to do is if somebody is looking for a job that you fit into, then they'll usually have to call or talk to that person maybe across the cubicle or wherever they are and say, hey, I think Angie's going to be perfect for this job. Do you want to call her or can I? And they try to keep that contact consistent. And so if the thing is that if that person hands the job off to them, then they just lost their commission for the day. And so that's kind of, it's sad because that might, that person might keep looking for somebody else even though you fit the job because you're, are working with a different recruiter and they don't want to, lose that opportunity to fill that job.
Such a bummer.
And so, yeah, that's another thing about the recruiting that's kind of difficult. I mean, they're not supposed to do that, but again, I mean, if you think about it, they're trying to make a living and they're, wanting every job that they can get filled. And usually what happens at the beginning of the day, it's like, okay, we got all these jobs, and they'll have like a big meeting and then they just get divvied out with all the recruiters. And so it's kind of just like luck of the draw or whatever. If it's something like that, if it's a small office, or there might be recruiters, like I was specifically recruiting for FedEx jobs. So, I mean, if there was a FedEx job, I would get it. And it was really easy that if there was another job somebody was looking for, because I heard about it that morning and I came across it, looking on my FedEx, that I'd just be like, here, call this person. I know you're looking for this job. And so kind of threw it away because I couldn't do anything with it anyway.
Oh,
so
wow.
that sometimes happens, but it just kind of depends. Like if there's a lot of general, then it just kind of gets confusing. And
Could a candidate work with more than one firm? Like with different firms, would they know?
Well, they'll ask you. I mean, they're going to ask you, and sometimes, depending on how far along in the process, they'll ask you to sign a, non-compete disclosure or something like that or whatever. So I think technically it's good to have your resume with everybody, and I would say, everyone needs to be more proactive, I think, because you never know when your dream job is out there or when you're going to be a candidate for something that you might be interested in. And I mean, I still to this day, I mean, because I've forwarded you a lot, I'll get bombarded with, emails and LinkedIn messages, and actually even got a Facebook message the other day from a girl I worked with at FedEx, saying, hey, there's a job opening and I think you'd be great for it. Are you interested? Are you happy where you are?
Yeah, I wasn't going to bring that up because I didn't want to share your business. But I think that's a real testament to the fact that recruiters really are using sites like LinkedIn, because you do get a lot of people reaching out to you and you forward them on to me to share, with
and
my clients.
I think recruiters are doing that too, because
Right.
a lot of times, I mean, they're going to contact somebody and be like, hey, I know that you're probably not looking for a job because you're working so-and-so or such and such, but, I want to tell you about this job, and please let me know if you know of anybody that would be perfect for it that is looking. Because a lot of times the best people, and like I said, referrals are going to be the number one, I guess, on the list, because if you're working with somebody you trust. So if you find somebody and their resume looks perfect and they're not looking for a job, if I could get somebody to say, hey, I know that you're not looking for a job, but your resume is awesome. Do you know anyone that's just like you? Because look, most of the time people are always going to hang out with and work with people in the same industry, with the same knowledge, with a similar resume, maybe background, if it's like that, niche market or whatever. And then they'll be like, yeah, I'm not looking, but, I heard so-and-so mentioned to me the other day, because you're going to talk to your friends and say, hey, I'm looking for a job, blah, blah, blah. And then, you can forward them on and be like, well, I'm not, but so-and-so might be perfect for you. Why don't you call them?
So you bring up a really good point, and I had a conversation once that made me realize that this might be something important to mention. So I had someone once say to me, Angela, I got a phone call from a recruiter, and they said to me, hey, I know you're not looking for a job, but do you know anyone that would be a good fit for this, right? And the person said, gosh, I would have liked that job. I wish they would have asked me. And I said, oh, they kind of did ask you. That's kind of code for, that's your opportunity to say, oh, no, I actually would love to talk to you about this position.
Yeah. Oh, no, they do that all the time because then it doesn't seem like you're being pushy or annoying, and it's kind of a sly way to be like, let me tell you about this job, but and pretend like they're not trying to sell you on it, but that's
Right.
exactly what they're trying to do.
Right. So this person was maybe more introverted that got the phone call, and it never even crossed their
Right.
mind. And so if there's anybody listening that you get this phone call, that's what's really happening.
Yeah,
You know?
definitely. And then start selling yourself.
Right. It's an opportunity. So speaking of selling yourself, you've worked in both sales and in recruiting. Do you see any parallels between sales and actually, being a job seeker and being out there?
Yeah, I mean, the better you sell yourself, the better job, the more opportunity that you're probably going to come across. Sometimes it's really hard because, I guess, of our society to have confidence and kind of brag about yourself because that's not supposed to be, like, polite. And so it's uncomfortable probably for some people. I mean, I know even for myself. And so I think that if you can sell yourself, you're going to be an awesome salesperson, because I think that's the hardest sell sometimes. Because if it's a product you believe in and you love and that you're familiar with, then it's going to be easy for you. But if you don't love yourself and you don't believe in yourself, then it's going to be really hard for you to get that job, because if you can't convince somebody that, if you don't believe all that about yourself, it's going to be impossible for you to convince somebody to hire you, because, they're going to see right through you.
Absolutely.
And that's just a fact.
I totally agree. Well, I feel like we've covered just a lot of different topics. It's been really insightful in terms of, we've gotten sort of like the insider view on recruiting, and I think that's going to really be helpful. Is there anything that we haven't covered, or is there any other advice you'd offer to listeners who are looking for a job?
No, I would say that networking and reaching out to people would be my, I guess, only words of advice. I think that you would get the most out of that, just because everybody essentially wants to help. They want to help people, and it's not going to hurt you in any way, and not necessarily calling that CEO. That person's not going to probably know about the job maybe that's open in their company. But if you find somebody that works next to that person, or they have an office, or whatever, if you can get in front of them, and there's all these different angles you have to work. And so it's really, I would just encourage people to be creative and not be shy. And if you're listening, definitely use LinkedIn, and make sure that you have your Facebook on, the most private settings, so you don't have all that out there. Because, people have been on Facebook now for, I don't know, like 15, 20 years or something. It's kind of crazy. I don't know. 2004, I think, is when it came out, so 10 years.
Roughly, yeah.
So we could go back. If it's somebody that's of that generation and see things that you did in college that you might not want, an employer to see, because you're not that person anymore.
Right.
So I guess that's another words of advice, just to kind of clean that up, or make sure you can go and do all kinds of things now to make sure that people don't see that kind of stuff. And I don't know. I guess that's it. If anybody has any questions or wants to contact me, look me up on LinkedIn.
That's
I always check my
nice.
messages. I'm really good about that, and I'm kind of OCD, so I'll clean them out, and I'll forward them to the appropriate person, or I'll reply. And
yeah, you're very quick at responding. So if anybody's interested to learn more about Memphis Reprographics, what is your website?
it's just MemphisReprographics.com.
Okay, great.
Yep, and that's on LinkedIn too. There's a link
Okay.
on my profile. So
Good deal. Well, thank you so much, August, for joining me. This has been incredibly helpful.
yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. Tune in next week for another edition of the Copeland Coaching Podcast. And if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher to be sure that you never miss an episode.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.